I'm Michael Barasch of Barasch McGarry. I want to thank you for joining us, and it's our pleasure to help because we are members of the 9/11 community. So we are passionate about this law that the governor signed last two Septembers ago, and the rules were codified last September. So we're going to share that with you. This is my partner Lee London and my partner Dana Cohen, and we're going to be talking about the World Trade Center Health Program and the Victim Compensation Fund and the law. We're also joined by Liam Lynch, who's a senior safety and health specialist at NICOSH, New York Committee for Occupational Safety and Health, and by Jamie Alfieri, who's my law firm chief HR officer, who will share with you some of her experiences. Many of you who are on this today already know how important it is to write employment verification letters for your former employees because you've written them for some of our employees. So we thank you for that. What we want you to be aware of now are the rules that mandate what every company south of Houston Street must do in order to comply with the law. So let's get going right now. We usually start our webinars with a short 2-minute video, which sets the table, and then we'll get right into it.
The first thing that I hear from the non-first responder community in Lower Manhattan is, I'm sick, but I don't deserve anything. I'm not a first responder. I just lived here. I just studied here. I just went to school here. I just raised a family here. Your presence here was an act of courage and resilience. The first responders, I'm in awe. But I also am in great awe of those who came back to a war-torn neighborhood that was clearly toxic. We knew it, but you stayed anyway, and you allowed this area to grow. But it's your courage and your resilience that brought this place back. So please, I urge you, access what you are owed.
Over the last decade, we have all fought very hard so that everyone has access to the health care that they need. It is very important that every community member anywhere south of Houston understands that you are covered. You are part of the group of people that have guaranteed health care if you have a 9/11 related disease.
So we have taken on, with all of these advocates here, the task of trying to get everyone to understand that they have rights, and it is imperative that they sign up.
One of the really surprising things about our research is that an event in 2001 can continue to have echoes decades later, such that it is as though never smokers are smoking 2 packs a day.
People don't realize that they are eligible, and for many people, it's not a question of if they're going to get sick, it's a question of when.
How do I prove my illness was caused by the 9/11 toxins? You don't have to prove that. It's presumptive. You only have to prove that you lived or you worked in the downtown area.
Many of us returned before the fires were out, without proper equipment, without proper advice from professionals, and now a slew of health conditions, respiratory issues, and many cancers.
Basically, to be entitled to compensation, you need to prove that you were either caught in the dust cloud on 9/11 or that you were below Canal Street between 9/11 and May 30th of 2002. That's all it takes.
We represent over 40,000 people in the 9/11 community. And one of the most frustrating things for me, and I've made over 24 trips to Washington to lobby for the passage of the Zedroga Act and then the extension of both the health program and the victim fund, is that while the unions have done a great job educating their members, as a matter of fact, over 85% of the firefighters and cops in New York are enrolled in the World Trade Center Health Program. Yet, less than 10% of the civilians have enrolled. And we've asked a lot of our clients when they come to us, well, what took you so long? Why did you wait? And usually the overwhelming reasons are, I thought these programs were only for firefighters and cops. I didn't think as a paralegal at this law firm or someone who worked at the stock exchange or at the Citibank, I didn't think I was eligible. Or my mother had breast cancer. I didn't think that my 2 weeks working downtown or on the pile for 2 days would make me eligible. Well, you heard Chief Allies of the fire department explain the word presumptive, and we'll go into that in a little bit. But that should not stop anyone from enrolling in the health program, and if you're certified with an illness, for receiving compensation from the government. So let's start with the two programs. Here's the map. So you heard Senator Gillibrand mention Houston Street. We're also going to be talking about Canal Street. Unfortunately, there are two different geographical areas. To be eligible for the health program, you need to prove that you were either south of Houston Street or in Western Brooklyn or at the Fresh Kills landfill. To also be eligible for the Victim Compensation Fund, which gives significant awards to people who are certified by the health program, you have to prove that you were south of Canal Street or at the Fresh Kills landfill. But sadly, if you're north of Canal Street, if you're in Western Brooklyn, you're not eligible for compensation. So we've got almost 500,000 people in the exposure zone. About 100,000 were first responders. That means 400,000 people are eligible, and only 10% of them are enrolled so far. So how did we address this problem? We lobbied to the New York State Legislature. And usually in this day and age, when you can't get Republicans and Democrats to agree on what day of the week it is, we were so pleasantly pleased and surprised when we got unanimous support from both the Assembly and the Senate. And here's Assemblyman Saez and Brian Kavanaugh as a senator. They were our heroes in getting this bill passed. And then the governor signed it 2 years ago. So what did this law require companies to do? Well, it requires companies who are south of Houston Street to notify their former employees about their eligibility for the health program. And if they were also below Canal Street, then they should register with the Victim Compensation Fund. It requires employers to keep this proof. And again, as I mentioned, it was unanimous. This is so uncontroversial. The only thing that this is going to cost companies is the price of an email or a price of a stamp. So it's a really great law that is only going to help people. Let's talk about the two programs now. And the first one being the health program. So Liam, can you tell us a little about the health program, your experience at NICOSH in enrolling people, and what the benefits are?
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. Good evening, everyone. Happy to be here. I'm from an organization called NICOSH. We're a nonprofit. And for the last many years, we've been enrolling 9/11 responders and survivors into the World Trade Center Health Program. We've worked with a lot of unions and worker organizations to do so. And, you know, the World Trade Center Health Program provides, it's no cost medical care, you know, health screenings and treatment for certified World Trade Center related conditions. And there are over 100 conditions related to 9/11 exposure. And that includes over, 68 cancers that are related. And the health program, they have 8 clinical centers of excellence in the New York metro area, and then also a nationwide provider network, which means that like responders and survivors can receive care in all 50 states. So this is not just a, New York City healthcare program. This is national too. And when I'm talking about, the 100 conditions related to 9/11, I'm talking about both physical and mental health conditions that are related. So we're talking about, airway, digestive disorders, mental health conditions, cancers. It also includes acute traumatic injuries as well. And again, this is at no cost. So it's, and for responders, let me just say, you can enroll in the program. Even if you aren't sick, responders are eligible for an annual screening. And we know that early diagnosis is life-saving. So all responders, should be in the health program. But we know that there are a lot of survivors that are experiencing these healthcare conditions, and they should be in the program as well. Even if they don't live any longer in New York, they've retired elsewhere, they can receive care in this program. Another thing about this program that's so awesome is that we know that this community, responders and survivors, are, always putting others first, right? They did that, 20 plus years ago, and I find that they do that now. And so they ask, oh, am I taking something away from somebody else who really needs it? And the answer is no, this program serves them and it's for them. And actually, their enrollment into the program could help others because there's a lot of research that is going on. They could, opt to use their medical data for research. And that research is then used to better protect, responders and those impacted by disasters in the future. So I always really encourage, responders and survivors to consider their enrollment in that way, because it's true. They are helping us, figure out how do we better protect responders and survivors in the future. So, Michael, let me know if I didn't cover anything, but that is the nitty-gritty of the health program.
Thank you, Liam. And I do want to follow up with two questions. Well, one question is an easy one. You use the word survivor. I hate that term because to be a survivor, it just really means you're a civilian, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's anyone who, just like the video said, worked, lived, went to school, passing by in the area south of Houston Street.
Right. And the second thing I wanted to point out was it was 68 cancers that had been linked by the National Institute of Health, thanks to women in particular going for these exams and getting seen. We finally had enough data so that the government added endometrial and uterine cancers just a year and a half ago, which is amazing for women in particular, because up until then, they had mostly they only had the data from the responders who were overwhelmingly male. And it took the survivors, the office workers, to go and complain about their illnesses for the government to finally link uterine and endometrial cancer. So now it's almost any cancer you can think of is presumed linked. And Lee, would you take us some of the most common illnesses?
Sure. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I've worked with the 9/11 community for over 11 years. And one of the biggest aspects of the 9/11 Notice Act, which I love about it, is that when I first started in this program, many times survivors, workers that worked in the zone, that still work in the zone today at the same building they worked at 9/11, wants to make sure that this program is real. And I worked when this program was temporary, and now that this program has been permanently funded till 2090, there's no reason why anybody who has 9/11 exposure that worked or lived, went to school in the zone, shouldn't take advantage of these benefits. Everybody has to. And the number one condition we get calls about is skin cancer. Skin cancer is the largest organ on the body. If someone talks to me and says, hey, I worked at AIG, I worked at Goldman Sachs, I worked at Deutsche Bank in the zone during the time period, I just had squamous cell, I just had basal cell. That's not cancer. Yes, it is. It's covered. And we want you to move forward on a claim to the World Trade Center Health Program and the Victim Compensation Fund today, not 10 years from now, 5 years from now, when you get that oh my God moment. Because if you were in the 9/11 exposure zone, and it's not just day of 9/11, many of our clients that worked at the stock exchange, then worked in the zone, weren't there on 9/11. They went back into the zone 2 weeks later and stayed there. The zone is, for the VCF, the Victim Compensation Fund, is 8-month time period. And many times, huge companies, because we wanted to get the economy moving, opened up very quickly, had their staff come in, and now many of the staff that used to work for these large companies moved away, moved out of state. And it's making that connection over an event 20 years later for them to connect the dots and say, wait a minute, my lymphoma might have been due for me working in the zone over 20 years ago. And connecting those dots and the 9/11 Notice Act is so important. So we make sure people take advantage of this real program.
So Lee, the client will sometimes call us and say, my mother had breast cancer. I was only there for 2 weeks. What do you say to that?
Well, it's a presumption. So if this client's mother was working in the zone and was diagnosed with breast cancer, she would qualify. Many times people think, oh, I have a family history of cancer, I don't qualify, or I was a smoker.
I smoked cigarettes and now I have lung cancer.
It's biggest presumption. Just like, hey, I thought this program was only for first responders, or I don't want to take money out of first responders. All I did was go to work. But the fund has been permanently funded and fully extended to account for that. So that's why it's so important for us to get anybody with exposure into these programs so they have the data and they do it when they don't have that, horrible moment.
Right. You don't want to start the process of finding witnesses and getting letters from your former employer when you get that diagnosis of cancer. You certainly don't want to leave it to your spouse or your family to do this. So that's why we encourage healthy people to get that employment verification letter now and get witness statements now. We'll talk about that in a minute, but that's why complying with the 9/11 Notice Act is going to save lives. And as an example, I'd like to ask Jamie Alfieri, our firm HR czar. Can you tell us, Jamie, introduce yourself and the organization that you're a member of, and explain just one example of how our complying with the law has helped a former employee?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Jamie Alfieri. I'm the CHRO of Barasch McGarry. Some of you may know me from my involvement with SHRM New York. Some of you may not. But I can't begin to tell you how important this act is. Here at Barasch McGarry, we did do the outreach and we did look at our former employees because we're literally 2 blocks away from the World Trade Center. So one particular employee was a paralegal who worked here on 9/11. She went home to her family. We did our outreach, and as it turns out, she was suffering from breast cancer and spent thousands upon thousands of dollars on medical bills. We were able to get her reimbursed for her healthcare expenses, and she received a very substantial award. Can I say the dollar amount?
Yeah, you can.
She received around $250,000, which is life-changing money, in addition to the reimbursement for her healthcare expenses. As an HR professional, it is our moral obligation to do this outreach, to reach out to our former employees and let them know of the benefits they're eligible for before they're very sick and aren't in a position to do it. Sooner is better than later. And not only is it our moral obligation, it's also the law.
Thank you, Jamie. Lee, Jamie already alluded to the fact that cancers are given $250,000, but there are other awards that you should know about as well.
So when the Zadroga Act was created, you have 2 federal government programs. You have the World Trade Center Health Program on one side, which covers the medical costs of your treatment. And they also certify for mental health conditions. And then on the other side is a separate program called the Victim Compensation Fund, where you get a monetary award for any physical conditions you move forward on. The best part about the Victim Compensation Fund is that it's been extended till 2090, and you never waive your future legal rights. So I have clients from Goldman Sachs and the stock exchange that have asthma. They go into the World Trade Center Health Program, they get certified for their asthma, they make a claim to the Victim Compensation Fund, and they're still actively working at the company they worked at on 9/11, or they retired and work for a new company. But we get them an award, and it ranges for non-cancer, non-life-threatening illnesses, 20 to 90,000. And then that same client who I got that award for in 2015 can call me up in 2020, 5 years later, and I can amend their claim for an increased award if they, God forbid, get diagnosed with a new condition like prostate cancer or another cancer. And we've been seeing a rise in this. But we can keep amending somebody's claim based on change in disability and work status, because if you have a 40 5-year-old that gets diagnosed with a horrible cancer, a pancreatic cancer, lymphoma, lung cancer, and then they're forced out of their employment and they go on long-term disability, then short-term disability, and then Social Security disability, we can make an economic claim to the Victim Compensation Fund and make them whole again from them going out on disability based on their 9/11 World Trade Center physical condition. So that's another claim we could make. Also, out-of-pocket medical expenses. Many times, a lot of our clients were diagnosed with cancers in 2006, 7, 8, before these programs even existed. They spend thousands in cancer treatment.
Like our former employee.
Exactly. And we can make that claim directly to the Victim Compensation Fund to get them reimbursed. The retirees I find that worked in the zone and then retired outside of state, they have a tough time getting further information of maybe I should join these programs. They go on Facebook groups, they go on LinkedIn. You know, they don't have a union website that they can go to and check for former employees all the time. So that's why it's so important that we comply with the 9/11 Notice Act. And it really does save lives because you could get requests from current employees, former employees that just want information about this. And the education is key, especially now around this time.
So one of the things that John Field, who couldn't join us today because he's on his way to Washington to lobby for more money for the health program, like you're going tomorrow, one of the things that he always is happy to say is, while the incidence of cancer among those who were exposed to the toxins is higher than the general population, I think all of you who were old enough to remember, we're down here, will remember the EPA assured us all, remember, the air is safe to breathe. Well, it wasn't safe. We represented Detective James Zadroga. You mentioned the Zadroga Act. That's the act passed by Congress in 2011 that created these two programs. And when they did the autopsy of Jimmy Zadroga, he was 34 years old when he died of pulmonary fibrosis. In his lung tissue, they found ground glass, asbestos, lead, chromium, benzene, mercury. These are all known carcinogens. And that was the proof that we needed to give to the National Institute of Health and why they linked all these respiratory illnesses and cancers to the 9/11 toxins. So sadly, just like you never waive your legal rights for more and more injuries and illnesses, and you don't waive your rights if you're disabled, you can now get hundreds of thousands of dollars in future lost earnings. They'll assume you would have worked till 63 if you're, in your 50s now, but maybe up to 70 if you're in your 60s now. And that could be life-changing money too. I gotta tell you, as sad as it is, to hear people getting cancer, it's also incredibly gratifying for us to be able to tell someone who's got cancer, your family is not going to lose their house. Your kids can go to college. Let's give the Congress credit. They did the right thing. But now, unfortunately, so many of our clients are dying from these aggressive cancers, even though if they're detected early, their chances of living are greater than the general public. A lot of them are not making it. So Dana, would you speak a little bit about the wrongful death benefits?
Thank you, Michael, and thank you everyone for listening to us today. It's likely in the 23 years since the attacks that some of the people who worked for your companies and your organizations have died. Our little law firm, we were a little law firm on 9/11, very dedicated lawyers and paralegals who came back to work soon after the attacks. And when I say we were little, 2 of our paralegals have died of 9/11 illnesses. And for us, it hit us very, very hard. And it's why we take this so personally. One of the things that we were able to do for these very special people in our lives is help their families to apply for death benefits from the Victim Compensation Fund. And it made such a difference to their families, to a son who lost a young mother, to a mother who lost a son whom she depended upon. So these programs have real life impacts on the people who showed up for our organizations when we needed them. And now it's time for us to show up for them. And the way we do that is not just by notifying them, that's the law and we have to do it and we will, but also making sure that we help them to get the proof so that they can access these programs. You have that proof. Sometimes it's not going to be easy to find. Sometimes you're going to have to talk to people. The records may not be there anymore, but you can do that. And it's going to feel so good for you to do something for these employees and these former employees and their families. And what are families entitled to? Well, if there was no personal injury claim that was brought while the person was still alive, they'll get everything that Lee talked about, that the person would have received before they passed away. Plus, there are non-economic losses, so pain and suffering losses for the family, for the spouse, for the children. The Victim Compensation Fund will reimburse burial costs. It will provide reimbursement for the value of household services, all the things that the person did for their family, childcare, taking care of the home, all those things that help keep the household running, and lost earnings, which, as you know, that it's devastating to a family to lose an income, sometimes the only income. And the Victim Compensation Fund will compensate for that loss.
And I know, Dana, since you deal with the sadness of talking to widows and widowers and family members every day, what is the most frustrating part of your job in representing this group of people?
You know, the person who was exposed to these toxins is not there anymore. And they can't tell us who they worked with, who they saw while they were down here. Finding proof is so much more difficult when someone is gone. We have to do it. And we try very hard, but we can use some help.
And even though both these programs are not adversarial, the government wants to help you. I mean, the Victim Compensation Fund is made up of people who are so dedicated to the 9/11 community, but they work for the Department of Justice and they have an obligation to make sure there is zero waste, zero fraud, and we applaud that. We, as a matter of fact, feel like we're part of the work that they do because we vet every case as if we were the special master's office, because the last thing we want to do is encourage a family member to bring a claim when they know, or we know, they don't have enough evidence. And that's why we're doing this webinar today. And we so appreciate your willingness to hear us out, to spread the word, to reach out to your former employees, because you will be helping so many people. And if they've retired years ago, I know you may not have kept track of every address of every former employee, but one of my favorite expressions when they pass this law is, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. This is a really good law. We have a question from one of our viewers today. What are the penalties for not complying? Well, there are no criminal penalties. It's a moral penalty, frankly. I don't think the government's going to fine you or come after you for not doing this, but you will be applauded if you're one of those companies that is complying with the law. And with social media today, you don't want to be on the receiving end of criticism saying, shame on my former company. They didn't advise us of what our rights were. And I wish it had more teeth, this law, but we were just glad to get the law passed, frankly.
And just one point is I want to say this is for active employees and employees that are retired. Many of the clients I deal with that still work at Goldman Sachs, they're shameful if they get this cancer diagnosis. They're very private. They don't want their staff and other people to know about it. And it gets to a point where I have to say, you have to contact your HR representative. You have to get the employment verification. Because witnesses are passing away too. Survivors a lot of time will want to use witnesses and they pass away. And they feel like there's a roadblock. They feel uncomfortable going back to an employer they haven't spoken to in over 10 years and being like, remember me. opening the door and sending a notice out to former workers gives them that confidence to say, you know what, maybe I should apply. Maybe I should look into this program. So
Right. We're just asking you to send a notice out to your former employees to their last known address. Maybe a relative is living at that address and will forward it to someone else. And if it doesn't get forwarded, maybe someone will receive it and say, hey, I'm still in touch with Joe. He's now living in Portland, Oregon. I'll reach out to him and let him know about this. So a lot of good could come with this. Our next step slide here, please consider us a resource. You don't have to hire us. We're not looking to be hired. We have enough clients, but we actually have in our database over 40,000 email addresses and phone numbers from people. We represent over 500 people at Goldman Sachs. It's very possible we may be able to put a witness from Goldman in touch with someone else that he used to work with, even though they haven't kept in touch with each other. We do this every single day, but we'll help you draft a sample letter that you can use and send to your employees. We'll provide free consulting services because we're so passionate about this. You know, as Dana mentioned, we are part of the 9/11 community. So that's why we care. You know, we've lost employees. I'm a cancer survivor. I care deeply that people apply. You don't even need a lawyer, frankly, to apply to these programs. Although when Congress passed this law and they set the fee, they capped the fee for lawyers at 10%. And most of my clients feel like it's well worth it, so I don't have to deal with the hassle. And more importantly, so I know that if I get an award, I know I'm getting a fair award, or my lawyers can amend my claim later down the road. So it does, I think, make sense to hire an attorney. And there's some good law firms out there who are as good as and as passionate as we are. But again, just make sure that you comply with the law and share this information with as many people as you can. And I will tell you, it's a privilege to represent the 9/11 community. Whatever we can do to help, please count on us to help you. All right. Liam, thank you so much for spending some time with today. Jamie, Dana, Lee, I appreciate it. And to anyone else, if you have any follow-up questions, just shoot us an email, michael@barashmcgarry.com, or call us. Whatever we can do to help, we're here for you.